Amy mentioned, my name is Stephanie Weiss, and I'm a solution architect at Mindset. I also run our EWM practice. I've been in the SAP world for over 20 years, all of which has been focused on the supply chain, warehouse, and logistics space. Today, I will be presenting my 10 tips for a successful EWM implementation. We have a lot to cover, so I'll just give you kind of a brief introduction to Mindset for those of you who are not familiar with us. Mindset is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we have offices both in Denver and in India. We are an SAP partner, and our primary focus is SAP. We originally got our start doing UX design for our customers, but since then we've grown tremendously and have offerings, or we offer everything from strategy and design services to full implementations and beyond. So to start off, tip one for a successful implementation is build the business case. So I think that the cornerstone to a successful implementation really starts with the question, why am I doing this? An EWM implementation impacts more than just the warehouse. It's going to impact multiple levels and areas of your organization. So it's really crucial that you're able to answer this basic question to build that business case and ensure that you have stakeholder buy-in and support. Otherwise, it's really going to be an uphill battle kind of all the way throughout the project. So why am I doing this? What is your rationale or justification for implementing a new WMS solution? Is it because your current solution lacks the functionality to support future growth and expansion? Is your system currently highly customized and getting harder and harder and more expensive to maintain? Or is your WMS solution approaching end of life? Or is it because you're migrating to S4, which presents a great opportunity for change? So why am I doing this? If I'm going to spend all this time and money, why SAP EWM? Why not another solution like Manhattan or Blue Yonder? Why am I doing this? What are the benefits of EWM, and what does success look like? Being able to answer these questions is the key to building a strong business case for EWM. So if we dive a little bit deeper into kind of those questions, EWM really over the last 10 years has evolved into kind of a best of breed WMS solution, but part of building that business case might require you to do diligence and evaluate other comparable solutions like Manhattan and Blue Yonder or Corber. The first step in evaluating different software is to define your evaluation criteria. You can consider things like core functionality, the total cost of ownership, extensibility and sustainability, risk, and vendor performance. And there may be other categories you want to consider that aren't listed here, but these are kind of the common ones that I've always used when helping companies do software evaluation. Once you've identified kind of your benchmarks, you then can rate each solution against your evaluation criteria. Typically, I use a 1 to 5 scale because it provides enough granularity to kind of really differentiate between the different softwares and their capabilities. So once you've defined that evaluation criteria, the next step is to decide how each category will be weighed. In my experience, capability and total cost of ownership are usually identified as the 2 most important categories and thus weighted at a higher percentage. But this is really, kind of up to you and your company and what you deem more important. We're going to pause right here. I do have a poll question. So we're going to kick off the poll question here. The question is, what evaluation criteria are you most likely to use? So if you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds here to kind of answer these questions on what's the most important criteria when kind of evaluating software, or whether or not you will implement EWM. We'll just give it a few more seconds. It looks like people are still kind of answering the question. All right, we'll look at the results really quick. So if we look at the results, it looks like capability and extendability and sustainability kind of polled at the highest as the most important criteria or when evaluating software. So we'll continue on through the presentation. The third key element to building the business case is to identify the benefits of EWM. This can be benefits at a functional level. For example, in EWM, you can use activity areas and bin sequencing to support Z picking and U picking, which you potentially may not be able to do today. That functionality is not supported in LEWM. Being able to have different types of pick paths or put away paths helps reduce travel time and increase picking efficiencies. Or, for example, another benefit could be in your current system, kitting processes are not supported, and therefore it's a very manual intensive. In EWM, standard MTO, MTS, so make to order, make to stock functionality, can eliminate some of this manual processes, thereby reducing labor and costs and making the whole process a lot more efficient. There are also a lot of other tangible benefits that can be attributed to EWM as a whole, such as increased productivity rates or inventory accuracy, elimination of not only manual processes but external systems and interfaces. You have a lot tighter integration with sales and manufacturing and quality, and overall just in kind of improved visibility and so forth. But the key here is to being able to clearly articulate the benefits that you will see from implementing EWM. And lastly, the final kind of key element to building a strong business case for EWM is to define what success looks like. So does success mean having a global template and a repeatable process that can be used to roll out the solution globally within 3 years? Does success mean reducing monthly operating costs by 20% or improving on-time shipments to a 95% rate? So keep in mind, success is going to look different for each company, but being able to say, being able to measure how you are going to, what defines success is also a key to kind of building that roadmap, or for building that business case. Tip 2 is build a detailed roadmap for implementing EWM. So a roadmap should include strategies for deployment, implementation, system migration, and data migration. So the key to developing a deployment strategy is first understanding your options in S4. Initially SAP announced that standard LEWM would be available in S4 on-prem only, but would eventually be phased out and no longer supported after 2025. However, SAP received a lot of pushback from their existing install base, and eventually in June of 2019, they announced a new offering, which they're calling Stockroom Management. Stockroom Management is essentially what we know today as LEWM, but without some key functionalities such as TRM, value-added services, yard and wave management. So Stockroom Management is still a very viable option and is really ideal for low complexity warehouses that wouldn't necessarily benefit from more advanced warehouse functionality that you would find in EWM. So embedded EWM essentially has 2 flavors, basic and advanced. Basic EWM offers a lot of enhanced or new functionality over LEWM. For example, with replenishment, you can now define multiple fixed bins for a material. With basic EWM, you can also define put away or different pick paths to support Z picking, U picking, and so forth. Advanced EWM offers significantly more functionality. Offers significantly more functionality such as wave management, value-added services, like I mentioned before, kitting, MTO, and MTS, slotting and rearrangement, and also has tighter integration into other modules, and then also into automated systems through their MFS layer. So once you kind of have a better understanding of the functionality of each option, the next step is really to determine what is the right solution to best fit your current and any future growth or business requirements that you may have. The nice thing about S4 is that you do have that ability and flexibility to have different deployment strategies for different warehouses or different manufacturing plants within your organization all at the same time. So for example, you could have warehouses in Phoenix and Irving, Texas, that are large and high volume with a lot of complex business processes. And that, advanced EWM would potentially be the ideal solution. However, your North Carolina warehouse might be big and have high volume, but it may be very, very simple business processes. So there's no kitting, there's no value-added services. You're mostly shipping, receiving and shipping full pallet quantities. So maybe basic EWM would be the right solution. And also, you might have smaller warehouses throughout your ecosystem, or medium-sized warehouses that have really, really simple business processes. So in that case, stockroom management might be a viable option. But so the key here is that you don't have to deploy something across the board, that you do have that capability to pick the right solution that fits your business needs. So I'm sure you've heard the saying, you have to crawl before you can walk, and you have to walk before you can run. In my opinion, this philosophy should be the guiding principle when planning and implementing EWM. So EWM is an incredibly robust solution that offers a lot of advanced functionality, but not everything is needed or business critical on day one. So in order to minimize the risk and increase user adoption, EWM functionality should be rolled out in kind of a phased approach. I typically advise that phase 1 should include functionality required to efficiently and effectively run your warehouse. The idea here is to really kind of start small and get some early wins before you expand. And then as the system becomes more stable and your users get acclimated to the new environment and the transactions and the new business processes, it will definitely be a lot easier to roll out additional functionality and future enhancements. And one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight here is that a lot of the advanced EWM functionality really requires a dialed in baseline. So if you're going to do task interleaving or slotting and rearrangement, you got to have a really stable environment for that functionality to work and for you to get the full benefits out of it. So another key component, and the last one we'll kind of talk about when building out a roadmap, is system migration. So really, how are you going to get from point A to point B? So whether that's going from standard LE or decentralized EWM and ECC to S/4HANA. So SAP does provide a couple of different tool sets to help with that migration path. So if you're going to migrate from standard EWM to S/4HANA, there is a compatibility pack that you can move your existing warehouse structure from ECC into S/4HANA. From there, you can continue to use your existing warehouse structure even beyond 2025, because that's going to be rebranded as stockroom management. Keep in mind, some of the components will no longer be supported, but the bulk of it will still be there. Or optionally, you can then migrate either to basic EWM, advanced EWM. There is a migration tool where you can actually take your existing objects from the warehouse and convert it into EWM. The other option is to do a greenfield implementation of EWM. And so that ultimately would just look like your traditional local-to-local data migration from your existing structure to a new structure. And lastly, if you are using a decentralized EWM system in ECC, there are tool sets to migrate that also to S/4HANA. So tip number 3 is consider doing an EWM POC or pilot project. So the hypothetical question for you all is, would you ever buy a car without test driving it first? So I think for most of us, that answer is no. So think of EWM, think of an EWM POC or pilot project as a test drive. It's a great way to demonstrate the functionality and capabilities of the system. It does allow you to, it does provide, valuable insight to kind of evaluating that fit. It allows your stakeholders to really visualize the solution before investing in a huge implementation and rollout. So the question is do you visualize yourself sitting in a Tesla or a Lamborghini? Tip 4. So during an implementation, EWM implementation, there's usually a lot of changes involved. And the natural tendency is to replicate old processes in the new tool, ultimately leading to the kind of the same problems you had in the past. So tip 4, and I think one of the most important tips, is to avoid a lift and shift. So my advice is to approach an EWM implementation as kind of like a rebirth or a clean slate. Really take this opportunity to kind of look at your business processes and your pain points and identify those areas of opportunity or areas for improvement, whether that be re-engineering or streamlining business processes, introducing new functionality or automation in the warehouse, but really to take this opportunity to make change. So like I've mentioned before, so tip 5 is use standard functionality as much as possible. So like I mentioned before, SAP EWM is really is truly a robust solution that offers lots of advanced warehouse functionality. And in my opinion, and what I experienced is that EWM should really be able to meet 90% of your business needs. If during your standard to fit analysis, if you identify major gaps, I would highly recommend checking with your implementation partner or even SAP to see if there are any alternative solutions, or if there's future releases that may have functionality that you can leverage to kind of solve that gap. Unless it's deemed mission critical, I would avoid any custom development as much as possible. Granted, in every project there is going to be some from custom development, but I would really take a hard look at it, whether it's really needed or not. One key consideration, or one thing I'd like to bring up to here is, as you're kind of planning and building out your team and going through these initial planning and the blueprinting and the design phase, really make sure that your partner and your team, has that right level of expertise, not only in EWM functionality, but real world warehouse and business experience. You can have a resource that is really strong technically and knows the configuration and whatnot, but if they can't bring to the table that real world business experience, you're still not going to get the best solution. And vice versa. If you have somebody really strong in real world and business experience, but doesn't really know SAP, or knows WM, but doesn't really know the capabilities of EWM, they're not going to be able to effectively solve your problems either. So you want to make sure that you have partners and team members that kind of can bring both of those to the table. So tip number 6 is engage your SMEs and power users early and often. So the first kind of 2 bullet points here is empathize, listen, and learn. Those are kind of, very, very similar. The first is empathize. So really walk in their shoes. So really take the time to visit the warehouses, walk the floor, talk to the people on the floor, really get to know their business processes. Along the same lines, take that time to really listen. Many times I've been in a warehouse on the floor for a tour and someone from IT or the business starts to explain a process, but the actual person on the floor, the warehouse operator, interjects and says, well, actually, no, that's not how we really do it. That's how the system wants us to do it. But in reality, we do it this way because it's easier or more efficient, or the way the system was designed doesn't really work or really support our business processes. So make sure that you engage the SMEs and power users early on to ensure that your design and build really fits the business processes, that it really solves their major pain points and enables them to grow in the future. Otherwise, they're just going to resort to workarounds, and you're never really going to realize the full potential or benefits of EWM. Third point I'll mention here is avoid buyer's remorse. What I mean by that is that, sometimes during the design phase, you agree upon a certain design, but it may not always be the right one. Once a kind of a design is implemented and SMEs and power users really start using it, they often find that it's A, not what they expected, or B, they realize that the other design that you proposed initially is actually better. So during the build phase, if you adopt kind of like a hybrid agile implementation approach where you have like this iterative design and prototype, it really allows and provides that ability for the SMEs and users to kind of validate that solution and provide feedback. And ultimately that helps to avoid kind of that buyer's remorse and reworking But at the end of the day, I think one of the key things or the key benefits of engaging the SMEs and power users is building ownership. Because at the end of the day, if the SMEs and power users, if they don't feel like they own or have been part of that solution, if they do feel like they own it and are part of that solution, they're going to be your biggest champions and your biggest advocate for process change and for change management. And they're really going to be, those champions for that project. Tip number 7 is training is a continuous process, and don't underestimate the time or resources required for training. I can't say it enough or iterate it enough, is that, EWM, even after being in the SAP world for 20 years and working with EWM for numerous years, I still find it to be somewhat of a beast. And I still have to look things up, and I still have to remind myself, well, what does this mean and what does that mean? So, EWM is extremely robust and has a lot of advanced functionality, but it just means it's even more complicated. So keep in mind, training is not going to be a one-time event. You're not going to train your end users. You're not going to do a 1-week training and that's going to be it. It's going to be a continuous process, or it needs to be a continuous ongoing process. Users are not going to become experts, or they're not going to know everything in just one session or even 1 month. So make sure that you have a well thought out training program. Can't say it enough, train on business processes, not just on T codes. And lastly, make sure you have a really good training toolbox, whether that toolbox includes job aids with process flows, quick reference guides or pocket guides, troubleshooting guides, whether you do weekly lunch and learns, but think about how can you continually support your team on an ongoing basis and continue to support and continually to train. One of the things that I've always done, especially when you're talking about a greenfield implementation, or even if you're moving to EWM, because it's so new and so vastly different from standard LEWM, I love quick reference guides and pocket guides. I know a lot of times now companies, their documentation are all online, and you have to go to a process flow and click on it and open up documentation. In real world, somebody on the shop floor, somebody putting together shipping manifests, they're not going to take the time to go and look up the documentation or refer to the documentation that's out there. So really having some quick reference pocket guides is key. Things that I like to include into my pocket guides are high-level process flows, so giving for the receiving process, what does it look like from the start to end, including T codes? What are some key process changes? troubleshooting guides. So if I can't print, or if I can't create a delivery, or if I can't create a wave, or I can't create the tasks, or so, how do I solve that? Where do I go to look, right? So I don't always have to call my power user or my SME, but I can hopefully help troubleshoot my own problems. A list of commonly used T codes is always helpful. And then how-tos. How do I do this? How do I do that? And then lastly, answer key process questions. For example, I have here a requester guide. One of the key questions that we included on our pocket guide here was, when do I create a reservation versus the purchase requisition? When do I do this versus this? So tip number 8 is testing is like chocolate. You can never have enough. So my advice, test, 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 test. And once you think you've tested enough, test some more. Like I said, EWM is really complicated. There's lots of moving parts, especially if you have some automation and integration in there. So testing is going to be crucial to a successful implementation. So please don't underestimate the time or the resources required for testing. Make sure that you test kind of those day in the life scenarios. And then also don't always test the happy path, right? Make sure you're testing those reversals, the stock out situations, the what if situations. Test with realistic data, and ultimately you want to make sure that you can do some testing or simulation of volume. Another key thing is make sure that you consume some pre-existing transactional and master data, right? So process pre-existing sales orders and pre-existing production orders, and make sure you're using, handling units that were converted or already existing sitting in your warehouse if you're not doing a greenfield implementation. And then lastly, make sure, this kind of goes along with one of the previous tips, is engage your SMEs and power users during testing, right? That's just going to solidify their knowledge of the system and the business processes, and they're really going to be able to help you moving forward when you start training the shop floor end users. So tip 9, automate as much as possible. So automation in the warehouse can mean many different things. Automation can be as simple as using standard functionality to automate wave picking, or the printing of shipping documentation or hazmat documentation, or it can be as complicated as integrating ASRS, which is automated retrieval systems, into EWM. But whatever the case, automation can be very useful in mitigating the complexities of EWM. It can also help replace tribal knowledge of the system, and ultimately, more automation means less manual intervention, which subsequently leads to less errors, better accuracy, increased productivity, etc. The one thing that I'd like to kind of spend a little time and focus on is in the automation category is RF and mobile. In my opinion, RF and mobile can either really make or break a project. In my experience, one of the biggest pain points or the complaints I hear in the warehouse is my RF transactions are clunky, or they don't really fit what I'm doing on the shop floor. Why do I need to do this on the gun when I don't really actually physically do this? So, SAP in LEWM had, delivered a bunch of SAP console transactions. Similarly, in EWM, there are a handful of ITS mobile transactions that are available to use out of the box. However, I really suggest that you take the time to really evaluate those transactions and see if they really fit your business. In my experience, the answer is typically no. And most of the customers that I've worked with, they typically do build their own RF transactions to better align with their business processes. So if you stop to think about it for a minute, the out of the box transactions that SAP delivers, it's one receiving or one put away or one picking transaction that's really supposed to support all businesses and all warehouses across all kinds of industry, right? But if you've been in several different warehouses, no two warehouses are alike. They're very, very different depending on, the size, the environmental factors, resource factors, the type of products you're moving in and out, the type of processes you're supporting. So a picking transaction might work, one picking transaction might work great for this warehouse, but may not fit the other warehouse. So really take that time and make sure that you plan to, to build some RF transactions that really kind of will help mitigate EWM complexity, but also help you on the shop floor. A couple of key considerations when designing and building out RF transactions. The first, make sure that the RF transaction facilitates your operational steps within the warehouse, right? And not what's required or the systematic steps in SAP. So make sure that what you're actually doing on the shop floor, that the RF is facilitating that process or helping you in that process and not making you do something that you don't necessarily or that you're not actually doing on the floor. Kind of along the same lines, make sure the RF transactions are multi-threaded. This kind of the out-of-the-box transactions that SAP provide are single-threaded. So in other words, in the background, the transaction should be executing all of the GUI transactions required to do one business process. To kind of give you an example, if you have to unpack or repack an HU, the system requires you to quote unquote do a bin to bin to the unpacking area, unpack, repack, and then do another bin to bin back into the original bin. A lot of times you're not really physically moving the pallet. You may just be kind of pulling some stuff off and putting it on a different pallet or whatever you may happen to do. But a lot of times you're not actually really physically moving the pallet to an unpacking area. So in that case, I get the question, well, why do I have to do this bin to bin? It's an unnecessary step. So in this case, with a multi-threaded transaction, you can initiate the unpack and repack. And in the background, it can do the 3 or 4 SAP transactions required in order to actually do that one single business process. This might be a given, but make sure your UIs are simple, intuitive, and beautiful, right? So you should only be displaying relevant key data elements, and you really want to kind of focus on minimizing your data entry. If back again to the standard kind of out of the box type transactions, their picking transaction, a lot of times they show the source storage type, the description of the source storage type, and the storage section. In my experience, excuse me, a lot of times in the warehouse, bins are unique, or there's enough tribal knowledge, or that the bin nomenclature is different, that based on the bin nomenclature, you know exactly where in the warehouse or what storage type you're going. So really seeing the description of the source storage type, like high rack or bulk floor or whatever, isn't adding value, but it's taking up valuable real estate. So, that kind of information you don't necessarily need to show or display on the screen. And you can save that space for other data elements that might actually help the business process. And lastly, the key principle when designing any type of RF transaction is KISS. Keep it very, very simple, right? So make sure, I advise not to develop mobile transactions for reversals or really complicated transactions or processes, because a lot of times, especially in reversals, you need a bigger picture of the data. You need to kind of do some research and figure things out before you can actually do reversals. And that's kind of hard to do on an RF. So over the past 20 years, I've been in and out of a lot of different warehouses and manufacturing plants. And regardless of industry or size, all warehouses kind of share some common goals and some common pain points. Warehouses are constantly being asked, especially in today's world, to do more with less, right? So they're expected to increase efficiency, speed, quality, but at the same time, reduce costs. But how do you do that with limited visibility or tools that can measure the health and performance of your warehouse? How do you identify bottlenecks or areas of improvement if it takes you hours to extrapolate and manipulate data just to calculate your picking rates or calculate your on-time shipment rates? So that's kind of where tip 10 comes into play. And tip 10 is define and track your KPIs and metrics. In SAP and EWM, there's a couple of standard tools that provide some of this, that provide some reporting analytical kind of capabilities. The first is the warehouse monitor. It's a central tool for kind of monitoring and executing warehouse activities. So it's really going to show you things like how many open orders I have, how many open deliveries do I need to process, where I am at in my picking process, or what TUs are about to head out the door. SAP also has warehouse KPIs on the, it's an actual Fiori app. This app is actually focused more on the operational and numeric metrics and not really strategic metrics. So similarly to the monitor, it's going to show you the number of open warehouse tasks by activity area, process category, process type, so forth. Likewise, it's going to show you, it shows open work orders, overdue outbound deliveries. But what these two tools really lack is more of that statistical and analytical type reporting capability. So I'll pause right here, and I'm actually going to do another poll question. And the poll question here is, what tools do you currently use for reporting in the warehouse? Standard SAP reports? Do you use SAP Analytics Cloud, Power BI, Tableau, or is it another tool set? Okay, looks like we've got some, most people have answered, so we'll go ahead and end the polling and go ahead and display the results to everybody. So it looks like that a vast majority of the people, so about 80% of everyone is using kind of standard out of the box reports or transactions. We've got a couple of people who are utilizing Power BI or cloud analytics, and then a couple other people that are using kind of non-SAP reporting tools. Thank you everyone for participating in that. So at Mindset, you know, this is that the reporting and KPI stuff is something that, you know, we've run across multiple times, and we've been asked numerous times by various different customers in helping build a solution or helping them build some, you know, some really useful KPIs and metrics within the warehouse, within shipping, and other areas of the organization. One of the things at Mindset is that we do have a software group, a software products group that builds out software. And one of the things that we've done is we've built a proprietary software called Warehouse Wise, and it's currently Fiori based, and it's a highly visual set of dashboards that provide industry standard KPIs and metrics within the warehouse. And this really helps provide a lot of insights into receiving and outbound and internal operations and employee performance. And so, you know, the key to, you know, this is the reason why we built this was to, you know, help solve this key problem of lack of visibility, the lack of reporting capabilities within SAP. So Warehouse Wise really was built to help warehouse managers easily identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies within the warehouse so that they can make those improvements. So one of the dashboards that we offer within Warehouse Wise is the shipping dashboard. And within the shipping dashboard, we have, you know, on the left-hand side, you can see a list of the standard KPIs and metrics that we offer. So it's things like, what is my order fill rate? What's my on-time shipment rate? You know, what are my productivity rates in picking, and what's my picking accuracy, and what's my cycle time? How long, you know, from a time a delivery drops or sales orders placed to the time I ship it out the door, what's that cycle time? And then also too, then what's my picking and shipping cost per line? We also have, as part of Warehouse Wise, we also have something called the Warehouse Manager Dashboard. This is going to show a little bit higher level type of analytics, mainly around kind of inventory and cost. So things like on time and full, cash to cash cycle, your carrying cost of inventory, your warehouse operating costs, and then a lot of inventory type of metrics like inventory accuracy, turnover, days of supply, and so forth. So we really built Warehouse Wise, to help solve a problem that we've seen over and over again in the warehouse. So some of kind of like the benefits of having strong reporting capabilities is, you have that means of identifying inefficiencies that you can then take action on. So it allows you to be more proactive versus reactive, right? So if you can't measure things, how can you fix things? So with Warehouse Wise, you can use it to help increase inventory accuracy and productivity rates and on-time shipment rates and so forth. It can help you reduce cycle times and inventory costs. From an IT perspective, gone the days of Access database and Excel spreadsheets. You no longer have to extrapolate data and manipulate data on your own in Excel. Warehouse Wise does that for you. Warehouse Wise also provides, we have an employee performance monitor that you can break down to see how people are, what the pick rates for people are within different storage types and so forth. So it provides kind of that framework to establish employee incentive or pay for performance programs. And ultimately, Warehouse Wise is an incredibly powerful reporting tool that enables warehouse managers to be proactive versus reactive. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope that this presentation was helpful and provided some good tips for you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box and we can go ahead and answer them.
Yeah, we do have actually a large number of questions, Stephanie, so I think we should probably get to them. The first question, I'm going to answer the questions, or I'm going to give the questions just for everybody's benefit in the order that we got them. If we do run long today, we will go beyond the 11 o'clock end time, and people are welcome to stay until we finish answering all of the questions. So I just wanted to mention that because there's so many. First question, I thought there was a change that now SAP S/4HANA still supports WM, but will sunset in 2027-ish. Not sure of the date.
Yes. So, yes, initially SAP did say that they were going to, that WM, so standard LEWM would be supported only on-prem in S/4HANA. So it's not supported on cloud, but on-prem through 2025. They did get a lot of pushback. And so they did announce at some point that they were going to extend that deadline to 2027. However, since then, they've also come out in June of 2019 and said, oh, by the way, yes, LEWM is going to be sunsetted. Oh, but we have a new offering, or we're going to have something called stockroom management. If you kind of peel back the layers of the onion, stockroom management is essentially LEWM. So once you've migrated your existing warehouse structure to S/4HANA, you don't have to do anything and it will still be supported beyond 2025, with the exception if you happen to be using some of the kind of like bolt-ons or the additional like standard LE type functionality like LE TRM or some of the basic value-added services that's offered in LEWM, those are no longer going to be supported moving forward. So the core WM will be, but some of this extraneous type of functionality, which in my opinion, I haven't seen used a lot, those weren't going to be supported because they've kind of been pretty much rewritten and fully integrated into EWM. Hopefully that answers your question.
So Stephanie, there was a follow-up on that, which is, but stockroom does not meet my needs.
Okay, so then if stockroom doesn't meet your needs, then your other option is EWM. And so within EWM, you have embedded in S4, you have embedded EWM. You also have distributed EWM. Within embedded EWM, you actually have kind of two flavors. You have basic EWM and you have advanced EWM. The reason why there's a difference, and I forgot to actually mention this in the presentation, is that stockroom management and basic EWM are actually included in the S/4HANA Enterprise license. So if you're going to use stockroom management or basic EWM, there's no additional licensing fees. However, if you're going to use advanced EWM or decentralized EWM in S4, there is a licensing cost associated with it. However, the good thing is, and this was kind of one of the things I made when building out kind of your deployment strategy, is that you don't have to deploy EWM across the board, right? So you can put advanced EWM in one warehouse, basic EWM in another, stockroom at a smaller facility. So you can, warehouse by warehouse, you can decide what is the best fit and what do I actually need in each of those facilities. And then the licensing fee is only applicable at the warehouse level. So if you've got 10 warehouses and only 2 of them, so 2 of your biggest distribution centers that really need that advanced, robust kind of functionality, if you've only got 2 running advanced EWM, those are the only 2 that will have an additional licensing fee. The other ones that are using basic EWM or stockroom management will not have a licensing fee.
And had just a clarification for you. So WM is not supported in S/4HANA. You were forced to go to S/4HANA stockroom management.
Yes, but it's think of it as a rebranding. So it's not new functionality. It's going to look and feel exactly like WM. It's all the same back-end tables. So your LTAC and your LTAP and all of those. And so all of that stays the same. It's just a couple of additional functionalities like that were never ever fully baked. Like I mentioned before, TRM, value-added services, those will not be supported. So some extra functionalities aren't going to be supported, but the core WM that you're using today will continue to be supported.
Okay. Next question. What are tips to avoid queue error? What are tips to avoid queue errors, particularly early in a new plant deployment?
Queue errors?
Queue.
Okay, so we're talking about, just for that person who asked, are you, just to clarify, are you talking about SIF in like a distributed environment? I'm going to assume that's what they're asking. So okay. The nice thing with what I love about EWM in S/4HANA is that you do have the option to either have embedded EWM or a distributed environment. So if you're in a distributed environment, you still have to use actually no. Well, at a certain point, SIF is no longer valid, but you will still use the ALE layer. And SIF, I believe at some point is going away, which is great because then you don't have that queue necessarily. And so you're just going to be using the standard ALE, which I think is a lot more stable and you're going to have a lot less problems with that. But in EWM, you also, in S4, you have the option to have an embedded EWM system. So when I say embedded, it's actually part of the core S4. So you no longer have to sift or transfer data back and forth. So things automatically, so for example, if you have, currently right now, if you're in a distributed environment, when you create a delivery in ECC, you create an outbound delivery and then it creates an ODR, which is an outbound delivery request in EWM, and then it creates the ODO, which is the outbound delivery order. So you have 2 documents. And embedded EWM, because it's part of core, you no longer have that ODR document. So as soon as you create the outbound delivery in ECC, or in S4, it will automatically create the associated ODO document, the outbound delivery document in S4 EWM. I believe in, I want to say 1909, no, in 20, I'll have to go back and look at the actual release. But in an upcoming release, the one thing that they are changing, which I'm very excited to see, is that when you create the outbound delivery in ECC, it will correspond to, it will be the same outbound delivery number in S4 HANA. So if you have a delivery 8, bunch of zeros, 111 in ECC, I'm sorry, keep saying ECC, in S4, you will have the same delivery number 800011123 in EWM. So there will be a one-to-one relationship between the two.
And I'll just mention that the attendee that asked did follow up and say yes, SIF and distributed, in case you wanted to add.
So SIF is going away, and if the person who asked if they provide their email or contact information or follow up with me afterwards, I can actually provide more information on that, because eventually in one of the releases, and I can't remember off the top of my head, they're moving away from SIF and everything will be done through the ALE layer.
We'll make sure we have that. Next question. In your experience, which evaluation criteria have your customers typically used most often?
So the ones that I listed there, so capabilities or functionality, total cost, extendability, sustainability, vendor evaluation, those are the ones that I typically use or that I have used most often in the past. What changes really there, and so you have your different categories, but then within each of the categories you might have different sub criteria. So if I actually will go back to that slide. These are the main categories that I think most of my customers, or that I've always used. Within each of these categories, the bullet points are the ones that change. So, core capabilities will often change because it really depends on your business. Extendability and sustainability is also then they're again going to really depend on your business and your business needs. Do you have multiple rollouts? Is this a global rollout or regional? One of the big things is, do I have to align strategically with IT or business? Or are there other criteria? So the categories typically stay the same. It's the subcategories or the actual criteria that oftentimes will change. But the ones that I've listed here are kind of the main ones that, are things that we typically look at. The one thing that does change, I will say, is how you weight the criteria or how you weight the categories. In my experience, usually it's capability and total cost of ownership that are usually prioritized the highest. I think in our poll, I think extensibility and sustainability ranked higher, but usually here, just because it was easier to do a 25% all the way across graphic, but a lot of times, core capability will oftentimes be weighted at 35%, maybe 40%, total cost of ownership, maybe at 20-25, and the other ones will split up. But it's really kind of where, what your company values.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Next question. Question on best practices for power users. Would you suggest power users per department or per module / configuration / process? Actually, how do you pinpoint the number of power users and what they need to cover?
Good question, Imra. Let me think about this one. So it's kind of going to be dependent on the scope of the project and kind of what functionalities that you are going to deploy or that you're looking at. Usually, sometimes in a warehouse, you have a lot of subdivision of duties and kind of expertise. You'll have somebody that really knows and focuses on receiving, and you might have somebody else that's really focused on the outbound processes. So at a minimum, I really would have a couple of different power users, one that's, maybe focused on inbound receiving processes, maybe one that's really focused on inventory type stuff. So whether that's cycle counting, replenishment, if you have internal value-added services, kitting, that kind of stuff. And then what definitely you'll need a power user for that, I think focuses on outbound, because I think that's where you can really get the biggest bang for your buck is on the outbound. And that's, I think, within EWM, kind of one of the most complicated areas. So you'll definitely want somebody that really knows the ins and outs of your picking and your shipping process. The one thing I will also add here is, you also are going to want, because EWM is so highly integrated into the other modules like manufacturing, quality, sales, making sure that, EWM doesn't work in a silo, and it will definitely impact manufacturing in the other areas. So having power users from the other areas too, particularly if you're manufacturing and quality, I would also have power users and super users that that have been identified and will be involved in the project, because things that you do in EWM may impact how they need to do things on the manufacturing side or the quality side.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. Next question. I really love how you've called out the difference in the EWM during business case, especially kitting and picking by cart. Is the business cases which processes should we start with? Excuse me.
I don't quite know if I don't think I understand the question.
I think the question is, in relationship to business cases, is there a process that should be started with first?
Let's go back up. I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, and if I apologize if not, if I don't answer it properly, please, feel free to reach out to me later or put a follow-up question in here. But I think the first thing that you have to do is define what that rationale is. And then I think that once you've kind of answered that, sometimes you will go through a software evaluation and sometimes you won't. A lot of companies have a mandate that we're an SAP shop, we're going to use SAP functionality. So, if you don't do a software evaluation, then I think that when you start looking at, okay, I'm going to do EWM and I'm going to start looking at the benefits of EWM, I would start with, from top down, right? So start with product coming in the door, product moving around the warehouse, and product going out the door, and all the different business processes kind of associated with that. That's kind of how I've always approached it. However, if you know that your outbound processes is the most important or is the key to kind of your operations, that's where you have the most pain points, yada, 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 then you could obviously start and really focus on kind of the outbound processes first and then, move to the other sections. But I always like to kind of start logically, because a lot of times, what you're feeding in will impact how things go out the door. Particularly with like receiving and put away, how you put away and organize your warehouse could greatly impact how you build out your pick paths and how you do wave picking and what kind of picking processes that you deploy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next question. Do you provide SAP EWM training?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you, we can definitely provide more information on that. So this slide deck will definitely go out to all the attendees. So feel free. Amy and I's email address are in the PowerPoint. So feel free to reach out to us. You also can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Great question. Next question. Hello, Stephanie. Thanks for sharing the tips. Dashboard is good. Can you share the presentation and is there any way to get more information on the dashboard?
Absolutely, Sudhir. We will be sharing the presentation shortly after we conclude. And then I believe we should have your contact information, so I can definitely reach out to you and set up some time to discuss the Warehouse-Wise dashboard in a little bit more details and answer any other further questions that you may have.
Next question. Is it good to prefer Fiori app, standard or custom UI, where we have huge transactional data transactions like inbound, outbound deliveries are having thousands of lines with shipment, without shipments to perform operations, GR, put away, picking, staging, and loading GI? How can we achieve performance issues in these scenarios?
Very good question. If I'm understanding, my personal preference, and this is just my preference, in my opinion, is I love Fiori. I think Fiori offers a lot of great benefits, and there's a lot of great things you can do with Fiori. However, it's not my go-to tool set for high volume transactional operations on the shop floor. I still think that there's some hesitancy or delay in, or there can be on the RF if you're talking about picking, packing, cycle counting, things that you're doing on the floor and requires a lot of scanning and instant feedback. I don't believe that Fiori is the right application. However, I still think ITS Mobile or some other, there's other cloud-based or there's other kind of out-of-the-box RF type solutions that I think are better equipped to handle the day-to-day high volume transactions on the shop floor. However, where I think Fiori is great is potentially in kind of the receiving area. So if you're not doing receiving on a handheld, having a really nice Fiori application that can provide, inbound delivery information along quality information that print the labels and stuff like that. Building something like that on a Fiori application where they're not necessarily walking around, I think it's a great application for that. Also, if you have, if you've got like a packing station and you're packing using a desktop in conjunction with a wireless scanner, depending on kind of your operations, I've seen really great really great packing applications that make packing a lot simpler. So I think Fiori in that instance is really great. I think Fiori is great for reporting capabilities, for kind of monitoring what's happening in the warehouse. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for the day-to-day high volume operations on the shop floor.
That concludes our questions for today.
Great.
And I think this also concludes our session for today.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I hope that this was helpful and useful, and please feel free to reach out to myself or Amy if you have any other questions or wanted to have a follow-up discussion.
We will. And then I also want to remind everybody, we do have our monthly roundtable, which is a international discussion on a specific topic. That's coming up tomorrow. It is on the topic of Fiori, which we had questions on. So if you haven't registered and you'd like to try joining a Mindset roundtable, that's tomorrow and it's totally free. We also have a number of upcoming webinars and roundtables listed on the event section of our website. We would be delighted to have you at any of those events, so please check those out and join us at a future event. Thanks again for joining us today.